Picture this for a second. It's Los Angeles, 1977. You're walking home alone at night in Hollywood when two men stop you. They say they're vice cops. They start asking questions that don't feel right. Your stomach drops because something is off. And then, in a move that sounds like it belongs in a movie, you reach into your bag and pull out a photo. You tell them your father is Peter Lorre, Hollywood icon, Casablanca, the Maltese Falcon. And luckily, these guys know they're classic movie stars, and unbelievably, they let you go. That woman is Catherine Lorre, and the men who stopped her, they would soon be known as the Hillside Stranglers. And if you're wondering how someone earns a nickname like that in the first place, I'm Chris. Let's recap. So let's rewind to Los Angeles in the late 70s. Disco is everywhere, and serial killers are having a moment. On October 18th, 1977, a body is found in the hills near Griffith Park. Her name is Yolanda Washington. Just 19 years old, she's a sex worker trying to support herself and her young daughter. She's been tied up, sexually assaulted, and murdered. At first, police treat it like a tragedy, but a one-off tragedy, the kind they've seen before. But Yolanda isn't the end of the story. She's the beginning. 2 weeks later, it's Halloween night, and while kids are out trick-or-treating, another body turns up in the hills overlooking Glendale. Her name is Judith Miller, 15 years old, found nude with ligature marks around her neck. Her body is left near a curb in a quiet residential neighborhood, very much not hidden. 1 week later, there's another victim, Lisa Caston, 21 years old, came out to LA to be a dancer, but currently working as a waitress until she gets her big break. Her body is dumped in Chevy Chase Canyon near a country club, naked, tied at the wrists and ankles. Same setup, same method, same brutality. At this point, the pattern isn't subtle. Now they know they're dealing with a serial killer. What they don't know yet is that they're not hunting one person. They're hunting two. In the winter of '76, Kenneth Bianchi lands in Los Angeles from New York and moves in with his cousin, Angelo Buono. On paper, Kenneth looks fine. He's 27 with the kind of smarmy charm that feels like you're being hustled. He says he wants to be a cop, but he's turned down flat by the LAPD and the Glendale police. He finds work as a security guard and gets himself an apartment in Hollywood. Angelo, on the other hand, is a 44-year-old divorced father of 5 running an auto upholstery business out of his garage in Glendale. He's loud, controlling, volatile, the kind of guy who fills every room he walks into and expects everyone else to orbit around him. Together, they make a bad combination. At first, the idea of murder doesn't sound like a plan. It starts as a conversation. A joke. You know what's messed up kind of thought? They talk about the women Angelo brings home, mostly sex workers. They tell themselves no one would notice if they vanished. No families asking questions, no consequences, and somewhere along the way, the idea turns into a city-wide nightmare where no woman is safe. Victim by victim, they develop a system. They pick women up in a van, drive them back to Angelo's house. What happens there is prolonged, deliberate, and brutal. Sexual assault, torture, strangulation. Afterward, they clean the bodies of evidence before dumping them on hillsides across Los Angeles. Sometimes posed, usually exposed so they'll be spotted right away. The papers can't resist the obvious nickname, the Hillside Strangler. And then the pattern tightens. On November 20th, 1977, there's a fourth body, Christina Weckler, 20 years old, an honors student at a design college in Pasadena. She's found on the side of a hill in a quiet residential neighborhood, partially covered with a bush. She has ligature marks on her wrists, ankles, and neck. There are no defensive wounds, which tells investigators she never had a chance. Then they start noticing details that don't match the earlier cases. There's a piece of a stove's gas pipe forced into her mouth, a plastic bag pulled over her head, and then something entirely new, 2 needle marks on her arm. Investigators later determined she was injected with Windex. Her body is found just miles from her apartment in Glendale, close enough to home to feel personal. And then, before the city can even process that, 3 days later, There's another one. Jane King, 28, an aspiring actress, disappears while waiting for a bus to take her home after an acting class. Her body is found the same way as the others, dumped in bushes near a freeway off-ramp. By now, the message is clear. Whoever is doing this isn't slowing down. They're getting more confident, more experimental. At first, police assume this has to be one person because statistically, that's usually how this goes. One offender, one signature, one sick routine, and on the surface, it fits. Same kinds of victims, same ligatures, same dumping grounds. But then investigators start noticing what isn't there. No drag marks, which raises a very simple, very uncomfortable question. How does one man carry a body down a hillside, position it, pose it, over and over again by himself? What if this isn't a lone predator moving through the city? What if it's two people coordinating, helping, covering for each other? And then the bottom drops out. That same week, 3 more bodies turn up. 2 of them belong to girls so young they shouldn't even be on this list. 12-year-old Dolores Cepeda, 14-year-old Sonia Johnson. They're best friends, grabbed together while getting off a bus from the mall. The idea that someone could take 2 kids at once, that's when fear turns into panic. No female is safe. And then Lauren Wagner is found. She's 18, a business school student, still lives at home with her parents. On November 29, 1977, she's grabbed right across the street from her house. The next morning, her parents wake up and see her car door still open. A neighbor tells police she heard someone shout the night before, "You won't get away with this." When she looked outside, she saw 2 men, says the LA Times. Lauren's body is later found on a hillside like the others, but now there's something new. Burn marks on the inside of her hands, possibly from an electrical cord. There's evidence she may have been handcuffed. This is the moment investigators finally say the quiet part out loud, because the victims aren't just compliant. They're not fighting back the way you'd expect, and that points to something deeply unsettling. Police begin to suspect that the killer or killers might be a police officer or posing as one. So they do something that would have been unthinkable just weeks earlier. They issue a public warning. Women are told that if they're stopped by a police officer and feel unsafe, they don't have to pull over. They can drive home, park somewhere lit, call the police to confirm the stop. In other words, Los Angeles is officially telling women they may not be able to trust the people meant to protect them. But police are throwing everything they have at this. A task force nearly 200 officers deep, a 24-hour tip hotline, patrols, surveillance, pressure. And still, the bodies keep coming. On December 14th, 1977, Kimberly Martin is found. She's 17 years old. Her body is left on a deserted lot near Los Angeles City Hall, in a spot where she can be seen from police headquarters. Kimberly worked for an escort service, and this time, the Strangler didn't even bother cruising for a victim. He called the service himself, gave them an address for a vacant Hollywood apartment. That's where Kimberly was taken. People in the building heard screaming that night, but here's the thing. The LA Times says in that building, screams aren't that unusual, so no one called the police. 3 days after Valentine's Day, 1978, they find Cindy Hudspeth, 20 years old, a student and part-time waitress. Her body is discovered in the trunk of her own car after it's been pushed off a cliff along the highway. At the time, that's all police know. Just another horrifying end in a case already full of them. What they don't know, what won't come out until later, is how ordinary that day started. Cindy had gone to an auto upholstery shop in Glendale to get new floor mats for her new Datsun. She loved that car. And this was supposed to be a fun errand, the kind you don't bother telling anyone about because why would you? The shop is owned by Angelo Buono. While she's there, his cousin Kenneth stops by. And according to later accounts, they decide to take her on the spot. So casually, in fact, the LA Times says they flipped a coin to decide who would strangle her. And then, just like that, the killings stop. By early spring of 1978, weeks go by, then months. No new bodies. And slowly things go back to normal. Still, the question hangs there. What happened to the killer or killers? Did they get arrested for something else? Did they leave town? Did they turn on each other? Investigators don't know it yet, but they're asking the right questions because the truth is they're not that far off. See, Kenneth Bianchi's life is coming apart at the seams. His girlfriend has just had his baby, and she's sick of his BS. He's always out late doing God knows what with his cousin.
He always seems to have some sort of excuse or explanation for why he can't keep a steady job or what he's been up to. She's had enough. So she gathers her things, takes the baby, and returns to her home in Bellingham, Washington. Now Kenneth is forced to make a decision, because things with Angelo aren't going well either. The two of them are arguing, clashing constantly, and their partnership is starting to fall apart. Kenneth contacts his girlfriend, apologizes, and promises he'll change, and she makes it clear that if their relationship is going to last, if they want to stay a family, then he needs to move to Bellingham.
So he does. He even applies to the Bellingham Police Department. They don't hire him. So he settles for the next closest thing in his mind, a job as a security guard. And for a moment, it looks like maybe the violence stayed in California. Maybe the Hillside Strangler era is really over. It isn't. In January 1979, Bellingham police arrest 27-year-old Kenneth Bianchi for the rape and strangulation of two local college students, Karen Mandick, 22, and Diane Wilder, 27. They're roommates. Diane is a dance student at Western Washington University. Karen's a business major working part-time at the Fred Meyer Super Shopping Center, which just happens to be where Kenneth works security. On January 11th, 1979, she left work around 7 p.m., told her manager she was taking a long dinner break. She's supposed to be back by 9, but she never shows. By 11:30, the manager, who knows this isn't like Karen at all, he starts making calls. That's when a friend explains what Karen had said earlier. A security guard named Kenneth offered her and Diane $100 each to watch a house for a couple of hours. The security system was supposedly being repaired, and they were told to keep it quiet. It sounded easy enough. Their bodies are later found in the backseat of Karen's car, parked at the end of an isolated cul-de-sac. Both women have been strangled with a ligature. Kenneth Bianchi is arrested later that same day. Nearly a year after the Hillside Strangler went silent, the case is about to roar back to life. Once he's in custody, Washington police do what they always do. They run his background. The address on his driver's license is in Hollywood, so they call Los Angeles to ask a few questions. Nothing dramatic, just routine. By pure chance, that call gets routed to someone who used to be on the Hillside Strangler task force. And the moment he hears the address, his stomach drops. Because that location, that's where Kimberly Martin was abducted. And the bus stop where Jane King was taken, that's around the corner. They start digging deeper. Another one of his former addresses, this one in Glendale, turns out to be an apartment complex where Christina Weckler lived. And it doesn't stop there. Another victim lived just across the street. This isn't coincidence anymore. When they search his house in Bellingham, they find jewelry, belongings that match items taken from Hillside Strangler victims in Los Angeles. And Kenneth Bianchi's name? It's been floating around the investigation for months. He'd even agreed to take a polygraph at one point. But the task force was drowning. Hundreds of tips, too many leads, not enough manpower, and Kenneth slipped through. Now, in Washington, he's not slipping through anymore. He's talking. A lot. He confesses to some of the Los Angeles murders and points the finger directly at his cousin Angelo Buono as his partner. But, because of course there's a but, he does it under hypnosis, and he convinces more than one psychiatrist that he suffers from multiple personality disorder. According to Kenneth, an alter ego named Steve Walker committed the murders, not him, which conveniently sets up the foundation for his insanity defense. Now, here's where it gets wild. Steve Walker is real. He's an actual psychologist, and Kenneth stole his identity. According to the Los Angeles Times, he pulled off the scam by placing a fake help wanted ad in the paper, pretending to be a therapist looking for an associate. The real Steve Walker responded, and Kenneth convinced him to send over his school transcripts and credentials. Police eventually exposed this whole thing with good old-fashioned police work. According to the LA Times, they went through every single help wanted ad week after week until they found the fake one. And just like that, the multiple personality act collapses. Eventually, Kenneth makes a deal to save himself. He agrees to plead guilty to the 2 murders in Washington and 5 of the Los Angeles murders on one condition. take the death penalty off the table and give him life in prison with the possibility of parole. Hold on to that detail. We're coming back to it. So here's the problem for prosecutors. Without Kenneth Bianchi, they've basically got not a lot. Angelo Buono is out there saying, I have absolutely nothing to do with any of this. And they're having trouble coming up with hard evidence that says he did. They tear apart his Glendale house looking for something, anything, and it's spotless. Not just clean, suspiciously clean. So clean, in fact, that investigators can barely even find Angelo's own fingerprints inside his own home. Now, that's not to say they don't have anything. On 2 of the victims, police find polyester fibers that match material from his upholstery shop. Is it a slam dunk? No. Is it weirdly specific? Yes. And when you stack that on top of the extremely detailed play-by-play Kenneth is now giving police, well, they have him. So in October 1979, police show up at Angelo Buono's place in Glendale and arrest him. But before we get to that trial, there's a story from jail that's so bizarre, it's worth a little side trip.
This part involves what became known as the copycat strangler. In 1980, while Kenneth is sitting in jail awaiting his trial, he receives a letter from a woman named Veronica Compton. She explains that she is a writer. According to her, she's working on a screenplay about a female serial killer and would like to interview him for research. At first, it seems unusual but not completely unheard of. However, over the following months, the situation takes a dramatic turn when he somehow persuades her that committing another murder could actually help prove his innocence and possibly get him released. This part involves what became known as the copycat.
Set him free. The idea is simple. If a woman is killed in the same way as the Hillside Strangler victims, then maybe, just maybe, he can claim the real killer is still out there and he's innocent. Why would this woman agree to this? At the time, she tells police she's fallen in love with him. Years later, she'll say he manipulated her while she was emotionally vulnerable. But she drives up to Washington and attacks a woman in Bellingham trying to strangle her. The woman survives, but Veronica is arrested, convicted, and sent to prison where she spends more than 2 decades behind bars. The media gives her a nickname, the Copycat Strangler. She is eventually paroled in 2003 and later publishes a book entitled Eating the Ashes, Seeking Rehabilitation Within the U.S. Penal System. Anyway, back to the trial. Because now prosecutors want to put Angelo Buono on the hook for all 10 murders, which sounds great until you remember who their star witness is. And Kenneth Bianchi is a problem because his story will not sit still. One day he says he just watched while Angelo did the strangling. Another day he says he wasn't even there. Then suddenly it's we took turns. It's like trying to nail Jello to a wall. Every time prosecutors think they've got him locked into a version of events, he changes it again and again. At one point, he's so unreliable that prosecutors seriously consider dropping the charges against Angelo entirely, which, just pause on that for a second. After 10 murders, after months of terror, they're thinking about walking away because they're worried they won't be able to win it. And that's when the judge steps in and basically says, absolutely not. He tells the district attorney's office that if they don't take this case to trial, he'll kick it upstairs to the state attorney general, which is exactly what ends up happening. So the trial moves forward, not because everything is airtight, but because at this point, someone has to answer for what happened. What happens next is a marathon. It turns into the longest murder trial in American history, a record that, according to the LA Times, still hasn't been beat. Jury selection starts in November 1981. The verdicts don't come down until November 1983. At this point, the case has a frequent flyer program. And Kenneth Bianchi, he's on the stand for months. It's messy, exhausting, and exactly as frustrating as you'd expect. But here's the problem for the defense. Mixed in with all the lies, all the deflection, all the nonsense, he's dropping details only someone who was actually there could give. And that's what ultimately sticks. In November 1983, Angelo Buono is found guilty on 9 counts of murder. He's sentenced to life in prison and he dies behind bars in 2002 at the age of 67. And then there's Kenneth. He's serving 2 of his 7 life sentences at Walla Walla State Penitentiary in Washington. Life with the
chance of parole. and he is still pursuing the parole he was promised during the deal. As recently as July 2025, he appeared before a parole board once again, arguing that he should be granted release. At least one retired detective attended the hearing, and afterward he shared a comment with the Los Angeles Times that was both unsurprising and unsettling. According to him, Kenneth hasn't changed at all. The same manipulative attitude, the same lies, the same sociopathic charm. Only now he's older. If he remains alive, Bianchi will become eligible for another parole hearing in 2035.